The first part of ministry, healing, and evangelism in small groups. I think that this is a critical skill set for the church today. And I say skill set because of the fact that I think that you have to learn how to do small groups and how to do them effectively. So we're going to look at the aspect of ministry, healing, and evangelism through small groups. And the first thing we're going to look at is ministry. Tonight what we're going to do is we're going to have an overview of what the class is going to cover. And then also we're going to get into kind of a description of what community is. And then in hours 3 and 4, we're going to be talking about the different kinds of small groups and the importance of defining small groups so that the small groups do not define you. In hours 5 and 6, we're going to be talking about ministry within the different kinds of groups. In hours 7 and 8, we're going to be talking about healing within the different kinds of groups. And in 9 and 10, we're going to be talking about evangelism in the different kinds of groups. In hour 11, we will be talking about why small groups fail and looking at some indicators of that. And then in hour 12, we're going to wrap up the class and cover the last few parts of what it means to have a small group and our small groups for you and your ministry. So, it's a very interesting thing that, my favorite definition of ministry is seeing a need and meeting it, because that's what ministry comes down to. If you look at the ministry of the disciples or the ministry of Jesus as he walked the earth, you'll see that as he encountered people, he detected what their heart level needs were, and he met those needs. It wasn't always the immediate need that was seen. The best one that comes to mind is the paralytic. The friends of the paralytic bring their friend to see Jesus. The house that he is in is overwhelmed with people. There's no way to bring their paralytic friend in to see Jesus, so they actually cut a hole in the roof and they lower the paralytic down to see Jesus. And if you're familiar with the story, Jesus looks at the man and he says, "Your sins are forgiven." So Jesus was dealing with the real need that was there, and then from that flowed healing into his body. So there's a lot of things that you have to understand with ministry, and as it pertains to small groups. Ministry can be easier in small groups, but it can also become more difficult. Let me kind of unpack that a little bit. Ministry can be easier because typically you're dealing with a smaller group of people. It's a little easier for maybe people to feel a little more open to share specific needs that they are having, specific situations that they are going through. But it can also become more difficult because your group can become overwhelmed by a particular person who has a need, or one or two people, and they just consume the time, and eventually the other people who are part of that small group find themselves falling away from that group just because as small as that group is, there's no room for them and what their needs are. So if you think of ministry as seeing a need and meeting it, you realize that in the world that we live in our culture, there's a lot of different needs that there could be. There's emotional needs, there's physical needs, there's felt needs, there's there's physical and spiritual needs, if I've already said one of those. So when you encounter people in a small group setting, depending on the type of group it is, it could be somebody who has an actual physical need, like their family is struggling to make ends meet financially. It could be somebody who is physically unable to do some things around their house. It could be someone who is physically battling, some type of addictions or some type of crisis that they're going through, or it could be some type of need that's associated with their spiritual walk. There could be needs associated with marriage. I mean, there's a lot of different needs that you can encounter in a small group, and dealing with it in a small group gives you some capabilities that you don't have in the larger setting of a celebration type service. I grew up in the church. I've been a part of mainline denomination churches. I've been a part of independent churches. One thing that is pretty typical in an American church service, and even in the overseas churches that I've been in, is that there typically is a time when people can come forward with any type of needs that they would have, whether it be emotional, spiritual, physical, and there'd be a laying on of hands, or there would be an opportunity to meet with somebody up close and up front. But there's not really a time to unpack really what that need means. One of the biggest problems that the culture of the church is because of the fact that we encounter people in large settings, and then that altar time can be just kind of a few minutes, is sometimes we lack in the follow-up, and we're not really walking out that life with that person as much as we had this encounter and we said, praise God, I had 8 people come forward today that I prayed for, that they would have healing in their bodies. And we don't always get a chance to walk that out just because in the larger setting, there's not always time for that. So that is one benefit to doing ministry in a small group. Also, we're going to be talking about healing. And of course, there's a lot of different types of healing. There's healing, emotional healing, spiritual healing, physical healing, relational healing. One thing that I've encountered a lot is what I call church healing, that you encounter people that have been wounded by people in the church, and for whatever reason they got used up and spit out, or they really kind of put their trust in a man instead of in God, and that person let them down. And so they really need to go through healing as associated with that church experience. I have a minister that I'm very close with that when he was hiring someone to be a secretary for him, he told me that what he told the secretary was, what I want to know is, will you be able to follow and be committed to this church when you realize that I'm not God? And that may sound a little foolish, but the thing is that a lot of times ministers can be put on a pedestal, and people don't always know how to handle that when they encounter humanizing situations where you realize that the pastor does put their clothes on, one leg at a time, and they do encounter real life problems. They do have parents who struggle, or children who struggle with different issues. And so sometimes that healing has to do with the relationship within the church. The small group is typically a place that this is fleshed out, because of the fact that a lot of those people have taken either a back seat to the church, or they don't go to church at all. Next one is evangelism. We're going to be looking at evangelism in the different types of groups. And evangelism is an interesting term to me, because if you say evangelism to a room full of pastors, you're probably going to get a little bit of a different description of what evangelism is. For some people, it's setting up a tent in the middle of the downtown area and preaching loud enough that, playing music to bring people in, and having that tent ministry there in the center of a downtown area, and that is evangelism. It's getting the message out there. For other people, it would be if they were to describe evangelism, it would be to take a group of people and maybe go to a park and hand out water, or to meet a specific need at a hospital or something like that. For other people, it could be putting on an event at their church where, you have bounce houses and free hot dogs, and you're giving away backpacks, and you're doing things like that because it's things that would bring the community in that wouldn't normally be here. That is a type of evangelism. But kind of lost in that is also the going across the street to your neighbor's house and, good old-fashioned, I live here, I'm not going to be here today, gone tomorrow. I want to live out this life of Christ in front of you, And so there's a lot of different ideas of evangelism. And the great thing about small groups is you really can kind of explore all those different kinds of evangelism through small groups, because as a group, you can go out into the community and you can provide some type of service that gives you the opportunity to show the kindness of Jesus, to show the mercy of Jesus out in the community. Or as a group, you could host an event and have people from the community come in, or you can prayer walk your neighborhood, or you can go door to door, whatever the case is. There's a lot of different ways that you can see evangelism lived out within the small group. So if you talk about small groups, and this is what we're going to get in as the weeks roll along, is there are a lot of different types of small groups, and there's a lot of great books out there defining how the best way you can do life groups or small groups is. I'm going to name a few for you. We're going to explore this in more detail as we go through the weeks. But the first type of group is something that became popular several decades ago, and it's called cell groups. C-E-L-L, cell groups. And cell groups are, by their very name, designed to grow and split. I mean, that's what cells do. And so the idea behind cell groups is that it's a great place to mentor, it's a great place to disciple, it's a great place to evangelize and bring people in. Typically in a cell group, there's a very structured environment to a cell group so that it's very easy to duplicate when you split. There's also very clear discipleship and mentoring going on, because typically you have somebody leading the cell group and you have somebody who's an assistant cell group leader that eventually, as that cell splits, the assistant will have their own cell. The leader will start another smaller cell. The idea is to grow that cell and then split again. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, and so on, with the idea that eventually we can have this group's reach out across the city, across the state, across the country, across the world. So cell groups is one way, one type of group. Another group is are life groups. I call them life groups, and by the very description of the name, the intention is that it would be people that you live your life out with. I mean, it's people that you celebrate your kids' birthdays together. You have days that the families go to the beach together. You have days that you get together and fast together or pray together. That the whole intention, holidays, the whole intention is that you would have a group of people that you would be accountable to, and they would be accountable to you, that you would push each other to grow, you would challenge each other spiritually, and that it would be a group that would grow together. The challenge that you have with cell groups, stepping back a second, the challenge that you have with cell groups is that sometimes people get to know each other really good, and when it comes time to split the cell groups, people don't want to split. And so as a result, it ends up causing both cell groups to actually suffer instead of grow like they were intended to do. The difficult thing about life groups is that it can become very cliquish, that you have this group of people, you do life together, people see it, they want it for their lives. They see it and they go, man, I want to have that part of my life. Hey, can I come and be a part of your life group? Well, at a certain point, it gets to be a place where it overwhelms a host, and it also no longer classifies as a small group if that life group grows too big. Another type of groups that we have are what I call home churches. And the intention of that is to be a replica of the church service, but in a much smaller format that would give opportunity for talents and gifts to rise up, for people to maybe lead worship that wouldn't do it in a larger type setting, but can do it in a group of 8 to 12. You would have opportunities for people to lay hands on people that maybe in a church setting that has 700, 800 members, maybe they don't have the opportunity to be a part of a leadership team that lays hands on the sick. Maybe within the confines of that group, you could have somebody who can go and visit somebody in the hospital, and those types of things can happen in a smaller setting. And so for some people, they see home churches as a great idea for small groups. Another description of small groups is what I call need-specific ministries, which would be like your addictions groups that meet together and they encourage each other and they challenge each other. Homeschoolers. You can have parents of young kids, singles. Those are all dealing with a particular type of person, and kind of a bounce off of that is station-specific groups. And by station, the way I'm defining station is your station in life. Like, for example, you could have a seniors group that is primarily there for the seniors. You could have a men's group, or you could have a women's group, or you could have a young marrieds, or whatever that defines. And it's the intention of it is about bringing a group of people that probably are experiencing similar things and similar issues in life. So it's a good way for them to be able to encourage each other. So we talked about cell groups, talk about life groups, talk about home churches. There's another group that is really popular among people, but not always popular among churches, and that is what I would define as fellowship groups. You know, the intention of it could be, hey, we're going to get together once a week and we're going to ride bikes together, or we're going to get together and we're going to play tennis, or we're going to get together and have game night, and this will be a good opportunity for us to be around Christian fellowship, to get an opportunity to continue to grow in our spiritual walk without being around people that are constantly pressuring to take steps outside of our values. So that would be a fellowship group. And then the last one would be just Bible study groups. The intention of the groups is just for people to continue to grow theologically, to learn the Bible, and it doesn't really matter the needs that are going on, because there's one need that's being met, and that's the need for people to learn the Word of God. So what we're going to do is we're going to, over the course of the next 6 weeks that we're together, we're going to look at what ministry looks like in cell group, what ministry looks like in life groups, what ministry looks like in station-specific groups. We're going to let it kind of play out through all the different groups. And then we're going to look at healing, and we're going to look at evangelism as it plays out through all the groups. So it's going to be an opportunity for anyone who's taken this course, whether you are a senior pastor who has a church and you're considering doing small groups, or if you are a senior pastor and you have small groups but they don't seem to be working, or whether you are going into ministry and you're looking to be a what some people call a family pastor or community pastor, that a lot of times has the responsibility of being over small groups within the church. There's another thing that we're going to look at and kind of do a pros and cons to, and that is how you start and stop groups, because that can be a very difficult thing. You can have groups that have this hard start date and don't have an end specific date, and eventually the host can get burned out. People could kind of start falling away from the group. Feelings could get hurt, or you could have start and end date specific. There's some benefits to both. There's also some things that are not as beneficial with both. So we'll explore that as well. So over the course of the next 6 weeks, what I hope for you to be able to take away from this class is that you will, number one, take away that groups are important, that they can serve a very important function in the kingdom of God. Number two, what I want you to take away is the philosophy of doing life together through groups. And number three, that you see the importance that it plays in meeting a real need within the church today. So those are the things that I'm hoping you will take away from it. Also, that if you're in that place of getting ready to start a group, that it will empower you to be able to see the type of groups that you want to create and have some understanding of how to facilitate that. So we're going to spend the rest of tonight talking about community and kind of unpacking that as far as what it means to be in community. Community, there's probably a specific definition that I could unravel for you here today, but for me, I like to take the word community and just kind of break it down at face value, and that's taking a common, a group that has something in common that gives them unity, And so when you define community, you realize that community could be really small, community can also be really large. Actually, tomorrow is the anniversary for the 9/11 attacks on the United States. And I like to use that example because the 9/11, 2001, took a whole nation of people and turned them into a community, because they became a group of people that had something in common and something that unified them. And what they had in common is that they were Americans and they were under attack. And what gave them unity was wanting to see their lives protected and wanting to see America triumph through a tragic situation. So another thing that tends to take a large group of people and make a community out of them for a temporal period of time is the Olympics. It comes around now every couple of years, and you'll notice that people, really support their country, and you'll see it, in people's faces. And it's a time that all of a sudden the nation seems a little bit smaller, and you feel a lot more connected. If you are a sports fan, you know that to have that feeling of community, all you have to do is step into the stadium of your favorite team. Sometimes my wife is amazed that I could have a 20-minute conversation with somebody that I've never met before, just if you see them wearing a shirt of a team that you like. So it's something that gives immediately that feeling of community. But that's not what really community is. Community goes much deeper than that. So there's we are a culture that is craving community. And it's something that God has placed inside of us. In Genesis, when God created the heavens and the earth and the beasts of the field, and created the fish in the water and the air, the birds in the air, when he created the vegetation, when he created everything that it was, the stars and the planets, and he separated them out, and he separated the space from the earth and the waters from the land. After he finished all of that, it says he looked at everything and he saw that it was very good, but yet in Genesis chapter 2, verse 8, he saw something that didn't match up, just wasn't quite right. And this is what God said in Genesis 2:8. He says, "It is not good for man to be alone." Now, typically, you will hear that verse, very appropriately so, connected in marriage, in a wedding, ceremony. You'll say, "It's not good for man to be alone." The woman will leave her family, and the woman will be joined together, and the two will become one. So it's a very appropriate for that to be associated with it. But in a much deeper concept, God saw that it wasn't good for man to be alone. So an interesting thing is if you happened across a Starbucks, which if you travel 30 feet, you will happen across a Starbucks. But there was a gentleman who was in a Starbucks, and he looked down and he saw a card that was promoting employment opportunities at Starbucks. And the card read, "Create community, make a difference in someone's day." So because this guy was a pastor, he was intrigued by this. He picked up the card, he flipped it over, and this is what the back of the card said. It said, "When you work at Starbucks, you can make a difference in someone's day by creating an environment where neighbors and friends can get together and reconnect while enjoying a great coffee experience." Now, isn't that interesting that Starbucks doesn't just see themselves as a group of people that is there to make coffee and to make a profit, but they see themselves as making a difference in the communities by creating an environment where people can connect and have that sense of connection. So it sounds a lot like what the church has always tried to do, create an environment where people can connect and that their lives can be changed. Another interesting thing is that me and my family, we purchased a home not too terribly long ago. We had been a part of helping a church plant up in Memphis, Tennessee. After spending some time with that church and it getting up and going, we moved back here to Jacksonville, since I'd grown up here in Jacksonville. And so we eventually, after being back here in Jacksonville, we purchased a home. And, the home that we purchased has a very tailored, manicured front yard. And then you walk into the house, and it's a very, common house on the inside. And then you get to the back, it has a screened-in porch. It has a beautiful view. It rolls down to some water. And it's just a beautiful thing to look at. And you want to hang out on the back porch. It's screened in. We have a table there. There's a grill there. I mean, this house, has a wiring to have a TV on the back porch. I mean, you could sit out there, you could eat your dinner, you could cook it, take it right off the grill, eat it, watch TV, hang out. You don't have a neighbor behind you. There's water there. I mean, it's a really great, serene environment. I've been over to friends' house who have, pools in their backyard. And what I begin to realize is that we've really become a culture that really focuses on the backyard experience, because the backyard has the privacy fence, it's secluded, and it's a place where your family can kind of get away and you can have your own time together where you're not interrupted by the neighbors, and realize how in contrast this was from our grandparents' generation, where you had the big front porches, where it was people would come out after their dinner and they would sit on the front porch, and as the neighbors were out in the yard and walking by, they encountered each other and they knew each other by name, and they understood, who was coming and going from this house and who was coming and going from that house, because they were invested in their community, they were invested in their neighbors. And now we've kind of created this environment where there's a million people who are standing side by side and nobody is having any conversations. At least nothing that goes beyond a interesting weather today, right? So we've lost that sense of community that was a part of our DNA. Something that, when you see my dad, grew up in North Carolina, and grew up in a small town in North Carolina. And so one of his favorite shows was, the Andy Griffith Show, and that was kind of the community that he grew up in. And, the town would come together and they would have a fall festival and they would get together, and it was front porch living, except for the fact that, it was more rural, so it wasn't necessarily people right on top of each other. And, you look at that and you realize that we've come a long way from that. And so understanding that, we have come to a place where this is kind of an understanding of our nation and of our culture. George Gallup, who is the one that does the Gallup polls that you read from time to time, this is a quote of his. It says, "Americans are among the loneliest people in the world, among the busy, overscheduled, keeping up with the Joneses' lives. We have quit connecting." So somewhere along the lines, we have gotten disconnected from people, and we have found ourselves isolated and on an island.